that the government has not been able to clarify the legislation there, and it makes it necessary for us to continue to pressurize the Turkish government. So a major problem in Europe today is that defamation is still criminalized in several countries. And when I raise this with those countries I mentioned, like Azerbaijan, Armenia, Albania, they also refer to legislation in the western part of Europe, saying, but you have it yourself in those countries, which is true. The difference, of course, is it's not used in the same manner as it is in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and those countries. But I think we have come to a situation today in Europe that we have to have a common position that we should decriminalize defamation and libel. We should not make it possible for anyone to bring journalists and others to prison because what they have said or written. This means, this means that we have to accept that insults of a very harsh nature have to be seen as civil law cases rather than criminal law cases. And this is precisely the recommendations of Miklos Harashti, the OSCE special representative on freedom of media. And I think we have to support him in this and make that the European position. In fact, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe recently took a similar position, also said that it's not acceptable any longer, if it ever was, that journalists are put in prison because of what they have written. They also made another very important point that public figures, politicians for instance, or leading businessmen should not have more protection in the defamation laws than ordinary citizens, which is the case in a number of countries. Of course, the position must be that there should be a broader margin for criticism against politicians or those in power, because they know what they go into when they accept offices, and they have to thereby accept a higher degree of scrutiny by journalists and public at large. I think this discussion, which I thought was finished actually, is acutely topical today, and needs to be pursued with another strength than so far, not least by the Council of Europe, but hopefully also the institutions here in Brussels. And I hope that there will be then also an element of the discussion about the self-regulation mechanisms, because this is the only possible response, that when the law is more tolerant, more generous, that there is at the same time a mature response from the media themselves when it comes to dealing with these matters. And in those countries where we have functioning codes of ethics, press councils, press ombudsmen, or whatever institutions there are, we have good experiences. It has worked for a positive development, both given ordinary citizens some protection against abuse by the media on their integrity, but at the same time prevented journalism from interference by the authorities. So the two issues, in my opinion, are well connected. The problems I mentioned here relate very much to the, in fact, are more acute in the former communist countries. We have a longer tradition in the western part of Europe when it comes to respecting media freedom. But the developments after 11 September has changed that, in my opinion. I've been very saddened to see that there was so little genuine and deep feeling of the importance of protecting media freedom in this hysteric discussion that we have had after 11 September. Adrian has written about it. I got a text that he has written before, which I think is very important on this point. He talks about the fact that reporters have been spied upon, that security services have used paid informers inside the media, and that media telephones have been routinely tapped and all these tendencies have increased after the 11th September. I think this is an extremely important area, very alarming. Generally, when it comes to human rights, one of the major problems today is the lack of democratic control over the security agencies, both the national security agencies and not least the cooperation between them across borders, with CIA, of course, as a hub in that net. So I hope that we will be able to take on this agent in a more serious manner also on the intergovernmental level. Next point I wanted to mention is that the threat against media freedom doesn't only come from governments and politicians. The threats also come from the owners of newspapers, radio and television corporations, and the business interests behind. This has become very clear to me when looking into the situation of the countries I mentioned, not least Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Albania. The media corporations there have been set up by political and business interest with a very particular interest in the result. And I've received credible reports about how they have used their new papers or new radio companies in order to blackmail or extort politicians and threaten them with negative scandal reports if they didn't take certain decisions. This is another type of lobbying, if you so want, criminal type of lobbying, which unfortunately appears to be quite widespread in certain countries. The journalists in those countries I've talked with are very unhappy about this situation. And again, they were in the situation that either they played with that or they were dismissed or lost their work. And there is a need of an international or European solidarity for those journalists in order to protect them against this kind of pressure from the owners of these so-called media companies. These are, of course, extreme cases, but they illustrate, of course, in that extreme manner the sensitive relationship between the media owners and the journalists. And as we know, there are problems there in every country in Europe, and there is a need of a discussion on how one regulates that in order to give some protection to the journalists themselves. The Berlin Wall, as you talked about, is an absolutely important notion in this discussion. A minimum requirement, of course, is that there is a transparency about who is behind the various media corporations. And that's not obvious in quite a number of cases. I also feel that this business development, and also combined with the technological development that we've had in this field, have had some rather dramatic negative consequences on the quality of reporting. And you mentioned here, Adrian, the worrying cutbacks on full-time employment and investigative journalism, training, etc. We do need free, independent and high-quality journalism, also for the sake of democracy and human rights. And here I sort of link the two, the human rights and journalism again. I think that a genuinely rights-based media policy would go some way to resolve these problems, but not all the way. That's clear. I think journalists themselves